And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will open it up for questions and answers session. I hope by now many of you may have already received a copy of the report, which is available both on Ethiopian Human Rights Commission's webpage as well as the UN Human Rights Office webpage. As I mentioned, the joint investigation team consists of 39 people, but today we are joined by the two co-team leaders from the two institutions, Albab from Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and Charles from OHCHR. And I have my colleague Aaron to facilitate the question and answer sessions. So Aaron, over to you.
I just have a couple of questions. One is, did your investigators visit Sudan? Because Reuters have been, reporting atrocities committed on Tigrayans, which are now, living in Sudan. So, did your investigators have managed to visit Sudan and spoke to, Tigrayans who are residing in Sudan? Another question, if I may ask, you have included example of abuse by all sides, and do you feel this accurately reflect the proportion of abuse from all sides? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Coletta Wanjohi from FSN News Agency. Your report is kind of timely, close to a year since the conflict was triggered, and at the same time, at a time when the government looks at a state of emergency as one of the major solutions to ending this conflict. There is concern within the public that with the government giving a call, probably a genuine call, to citizens to protect themselves, protect the community, we might have more human rights violations. Are you concerned too? And will that make, for example, dilute the kind of impact that you would love this report to have had? Thank you.
እሺ አመሰግናለሁ። በአማርኛ ስለምሰራ በአማርኛ ጠይቃለሁ። ዶክተር ዳንኤልን ለመጠየቅ የምፈልገው ነገር ከሰሞኑ የዚህ ምርመራ ሪፖርት ይፋ እንደሚደረግ ከመገለጹ ጋር ተያይዞ አንዳንድ ስቶሪዎች ዜናዎች ያያችሁ ይመስለኛል። ምንድነው መጠየቅ የፈለኩት ይሄንን ምርመራ በመታደርጉበት ጊዜ ከመንግስት ወይም ከዚህ ጉዳይ ጋር በቀጥታ ከሚገናኙ አካላት ጫና ተጽዕኖ ጉዳዩን በደንብ ማሳየት እንዳትችሉ የሚያደርግ ተጽዕኖ ደርሶባችሁ ነበር ወይ? በተለይ ከመንግስት እንዲህ አይነት ተጽዕኖና ጫና ደርሶባችሁ ነበር ወይ? ሪፖርቱ ምን ያህል ከነዚህ ነገሮች የነጻ ነው ብላችሁ ታምናላችሁ?
Thank you for the briefing. I'm Robbie with AFP. The Prime Minister's office has issued a statement just now saying that the report published today establishes that claims of genocide have no factual basis and that there's no evidence of the use of starvation as a weapon of war in the conflict. Is that an accurate representation of the findings, in your opinion? And are you confident weighing in on those issues or ruling them out, given the considerable limitations that your investigators encountered while on the ground? And secondly, related to that, I wanted to ask about your access to survivors. Given some of the claims by the TPLF of bias against the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, did survivors in Tigray cooperate with you? And are you confident that you were able to get a complete picture of abuses that were perpetrated against them? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I will have my colleague Albab respond to one of the questions, and then I will respond to the others, and we complement each other with our responses.
Hello, everyone. So just to maybe respond to the last question about access to survivors, I hope you have seen our report or the executive summary, which indicates how many witnesses and survivors we have managed to talk to, which is quite considerable. 269 people, 124 women, 145 men. We have had challenges, which is indicated in our report. One of the challenges being the perceptions of bias, not only of EHRC, because we've also had some challenges, suspicion towards international actors as well, which is due to the climate that we are operating in. There has been a very strong campaign against the joint investigation as well from all sides. So I would like to acknowledge that, yes, there were challenges, but we were able to really carry out our work to the best extent possible in light of the reality that we are operating in.
Visit to Sudan. In fact, the visit to Sudan and then to speak to refugees who fled Tigray was part of our visit, our field visit plan. So the deployment as part of its geographical coverage also at the planning stage included Sudan. But unfortunately, the joint investigation team did not go to Sudan for various reasons. I think it's first of all, the change in the dynamic of the conflict, secondly, logistic, and then also for time, availability of a time issue. So we were not able to go jointly to Sudan. However, and this is an individual view that I'm expressing here, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights was able to document situation of human rights in eastern Sudan. I mean, from refugees who fled Tigray. You know that we have an office in Sudan, and the High Commissioner has also a global mandate to monitor and then report globally, including, of course, in eastern Sudan, the situation of human rights. But those information collected have not been fed into the joint report that we have published now, because simply one of the fundamental principles of the joint investigation is the jointness of all exercises, right from the constitution of the investigators to the deployment in the field, to the analysis, and also to the conclusion. So we were not able to use that. I wanted to say something about it.
No, I wanted just to add that when you look at the report later, when you get access to the whole copy of it, you will see that we have addressed some of the challenges that we have faced and some of the issues that are being responded to now, like not being able to access certain areas or not being able to go to Sudan, are some of those challenges. I wanted to respond to a question. It wasn't very clear whether the investigation was able, all the information collected, does it reflect a balance of all the abuses committed by all parties? When you look at the report, you will find that in different locations there are other parties who are, implicated more than others. So it will depend on you when you look at the report to make the assessment on which one was more balanced or which one was more implicated than the other. With respect to the question on genocide, I think that maybe Daniel will also add on that, but when you look at the report, the investigation team could not confirm that. There are a number of violations that we encountered when we spoke to the victims, but we could not confirm that. What we could say then, as per the recommendation, is if that such an allegation is there and still there, that could still be unasked by another mechanism. But this joint investigation was not able to confirm that. Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. Just adding a few more words on to what my colleagues have said. Yeah, The investigation has identified a wide range of human rights violations and abuses, the most serious ones being crimes against humanity, which may amount to crimes against humanity or which may amount to war crimes. Mind you, the standard of proof we have adopted for such a human rights investigation is a lower threshold than is normally required in a criminal investigation. So on the basis of the collectively gathered and collectively analyzed information and evidence we have, the violations we have identified may amount to crimes against humanity or war crimes and a number of other violations, but not genocide. So that's clearly stated in the report. But I would also like to say a few words on the second part of your question, Robbie, about humanitarian access. The report, you will see from the report that there were impediments or delays in humanitarian assistance, which largely is attributed to the active conflict and the security situation and lack of functional local administrative bodies for coordination and the lack of cooperation by the security forces operating in the area, including ENDF and EDF at checkpoints. And also Tigrayan forces were also implicated in setting up roadblocks in delaying delivery of humanitarian relief. But overall, on your point, whether or not there was a deliberate or willful denial of humanitarian assistance, the Joint Investigation Team did not confirm that there is a deliberate or willful denial of humanitarian assistance to the civilian population in Tigray or the use of starvation as a weapon of war. But the JTI recognizes the need for further investigation on these alleged violations related to denial of access to humanitarian relief, as well as the killings of humanitarian workers. And I will let my colleague Marcel add a few more thoughts, but responding to one of the colleagues here who asked in Amharic, and if you don't mind, I will be happy to reply to him in Amharic. But his question was whether or not the joint investigation has been subjected to pressure and influence from government or other sources, but more importantly from government. So ከመንግስት ተጽዕኖ ደርሶባችሁ ነበር ወይ ብለህ ያነሳውን ጥያቄ ወንድሜ፣ የምርመራ ስራችን ልዩ ልዩ አይነት እንቅፋቶችና መሰናክሎች ገጥመውት ነበረ። ያንን በሪፖርታችን ላይ እናመለክታለን። ተግዳሮቶች ነበሩ። ነገር ግን በምርመራ ስራ ሂደታችን ውስጥ ከመንግስት ወይም ከሌላ አካል ቀጥታ ተጽዕኖ ገጥሞን አያውቅም። ያ ማለት ችግሮችና እንቅፋቶች አልነበሩም ማለት አይደለም። ግን በየትኛውም አይነት መስፈርት ከመንግስት ወይም ከሌላ ማንኛውም አካል ቀጥተኛ ተጽዕኖ እና ጣልቃ ገብነት በስራችን ውስጥ አልነበረም። ይህንን ካልኩ በኋላ ግን ሪፖርቱ ላይ በርካታ እንቅፋቶች፣ መሰናክሎች ገጥመውን ስለነበረ እነዛ እንቅፋቶችና መሰናክሎች ምን እንደነበሩ ሪፖርቱ ላይ እንድታየው ጋብዛለሁ። So I think for the benefit of the English-speaking audience, I briefly responded by saying we have faced various challenges as outlined in the report, but the investigation team has not been subjected to any direct influence or pressure or any direct interference from government or any other sources. But that does not mean that there were no challenges in the conduct of the investigation. Indeed, there were several challenges, some of which have been mentioned, but you will see details of the different kinds of both logistical, security, and the other types of challenges we have faced in the course of this investigation. Marcel, you wanted to add something else?
Yes, sure. Just to clarify that the joint investigation is simply a human rights investigation. It's not a criminal investigation. and then I can understand that at some point people are interested in qualification of a violation that we've been able to document in the field. But our aim is not to behave as we are in a kind of judicial proceeding. That's not the case. We're not establishing individual or collective criminal accountability or responsibility in this. What we're doing is to be able to collect broad evidence that will form a basis of a criminal procedure. So I think that it's very, very difficult for us in this role to, on this basis, make some determination as if we are in the context of a criminal proceeding which require a different set of thresholds for legal analysis and which will require a different, definitely set of instructions and of analysis of evidence and evidentiary basis, as you know, those of you who are lawyers. So that's something that I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Before we open it up for another round of questions, I think there is one question we forgot from, I think it's from Coletta from MSN, about the release of this report, given the context Ethiopia is in, including the state of emergency situation. So obviously, as we also indicated in our presentations, the conflict continues to expand with more reports of violations and abuses, which is of grave concern. And the time Ethiopia is in, as my colleague Marcel has explained, is a critical moment. So we do acknowledge that the continued expansion of the conflict continues to pose more risk for human rights situation in the country, but at the same time we do hope that the release of this report hopefully presents an opportunity for all parties in the conflict to pause, reflect, and acknowledge responsibility, and use the opportunity of this moment and its overall findings and recommendations for the start of a new chapter towards concrete measures both on accountability and redress for victims, as well as the search for sustainable solution out of the deep political crisis Ethiopia is in. With that, Aaron, another round of questions.
Thank you. I'm Eleni from Kana Zena. The first question is, perhaps if you could elaborate a little bit on the methodology used, because a lot of the questions arising seem to be about the validity and the accuracy of the report. So if you could elaborate a little bit, the ones you mentioned in passing on the methodologies used to come up with the report. My second question is, the Ethiopian Defense Forces, the Tigrayan Special Forces, the Eritrean Forces were mentioned as parties to the conflict. Is that an all-inclusive list, or were there other parties to the conflict, whether internal or external, that your investigation has identified? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fred from the Times of London. My first question follows on from the one about Sudan. Do you feel that the findings of your report was undermined by the facts that your investigators weren't able to travel to certain areas within Tigray, particularly Aksum? And my second question is, which party to the conflict is responsible for the bulk of the violations that your teams identified? Thanks.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I will let Albab respond to some of the questions, particularly about methodology. And then Charles also would probably like to add to that. And maybe Albab, you can also respond to a question from my sister from Kana Media about the list of actors as well. And then any of the questions you want to respond to, and we will respond to others.
Okay, thank you. On the methodology, there's a section in the report which extensively deals with the methodology that we used. But just to briefly read from the executive summary, about the methodology. Prior to the commencement of the investigation, the Joint Investigation Team agreed on its methods of work to guide the investigation and applied best practices regarding victim and witness protection, rules of procedure, international investigative standards, report writing, and archiving. Consistent with the practice of international fact-finding bodies, the Joint Investigation Team adopted a reasonable grounds to believe standard of proof for factual determination on individual cases, incidents, and patterns of violations. So this is basically the standard that was used, and we worked, of course, very closely together with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which developed the guidance and practice on commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions on international human rights law and international humanitarian law. But you can find more information in the report. But just to underscore again the difference between reasonable grounds to believe threshold and criminal liability implicating kind of threshold, it is not the same type of threshold. This is a human rights investigation, and this will not lead directly to criminal prosecution. It has to be investigated independently. So basically, this is indicative of further investigations into allegations of human rights violations, IHL, and refugee law. I think the other question was about the parties to the conflict. I think in different incidents and in different locations, different parties are implicated. At times, I think there were also groups like the Fano as well as the Samri. So the list you mentioned was not complete, but you will find in the report different actors involved in different kinds of allegations. Maybe on the question of ranking perpetrators, that was not the intention of the investigation, and it is not included in the objectives of the investigation as well. You can see the objectives of the investigation was to document allegations of human rights violations and its gender dimension, to further the accountability process and advocate for effective remedies, provide clear and actionable recommendations, and identify violations that should be prosecuted and that redress is provided for victims. But I'm sure that the principals have more to say on this.
Thank you, Albab. Charles?
Okay, I think Albab has dealt with the methodology one. I will just add that I think to emphasize that one of the things that we had to do, because we understood very well the complexity of this investigation, was to be very prepared in terms of the methodology that we were going to use in the field. And therefore, before the investigation started, we developed a methods of work which is consistent with the OHCHR accepted international methodology. So we employed the practice that is used also for commissions of inquiry and fact findings. And therefore, if you look at the report and some of the information, including the testimonies that were provided, we carried out interviews with the victims and witnesses, a number of them. Some of them we have even put quotations there. We also visited places where these incidents happened, so we observed ourselves. This is going to be different from a remote kind of investigation or monitoring. And then we made sure, for example, where it came to sexual violence, that we had experts within the team that were dealing with the sensitive cases of sexual violence, ensuring that confidentiality and all elements around investigation of such incidents were adhered to according to the international standards. There is the question on other places where we were unable to visit, which we have actually outlined as part of the challenges. But we had to deal with this by ensuring that we interviewed people that had been affected from these locations, especially from the IDP sites where we visited. So you will look at the report and also notice that even those areas or locations where we didn't visit as we expected, we have information that we collected through the interviews in the IDP camps. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles. Just in addition to those 2 points, a couple of a couple of elements that I would want to highlight. In addition to the methodology, which really, as Albab and then Charles say, were fundamentally conform with international standard applicable, which we also use as a OHCHR to conduct our own monitoring. And there are elements within the methodological process that we have taken into consideration, which are extremely important in every single investigation. The first one is the gender dimension. The gender dimension has been extremely carefully weighing and then sustainably considered throughout the process, right from the constitution of the teams to the interviewing process and then the collection of information to the analysis and so on. So it has been something that has extremely been very much present in our methodological process, but also thinking. The second one is the protection of sources. I think given the context we were operating in, the protection of sources, and especially applying the do no harm of principle in conducting this investigation was key. We encountered a situation where definitely interviewing victim or source could present a significant protection threat for them. So it is our responsibility not to go ahead, and that has been preserved throughout the process. And then last, still in this protection, and then protection of sources, but also protection of data, we have set up what a very secure online database, a SharePoint, where we have access not only to have a more democratic and then safer management of the data that we've been able to collect it, but also how everyone could have access to the same information, but in a more protected way. So all those elements form part of the methodological process that help us to arrive at the conclusion that we are presenting to you today, but also to the recommendation that we have formulated, which hopefully could lead to criminal investigation and to ensure that accountability prevails in the context of the conflict. The action element, I was sure that when we come here today, we will be asked, how can you present a report without going to Aksum? Because Aksum is one of the very emblematic development in the conflict itself. But as Charles says, of course, that we didn't go to Aksum in the context of this joint investigation, but we've been able to largely interview sources, witnesses, people who are in the IDP camp in various locations across Tigray, to collect very vital and critical information to be able to form a judgment and an analysis that went into this report on the Aksum situation. And then the final point, I think that Charles also alluded to that. I think that what we try to do is not to be in a kind of a blame-based mindset. What we try to do is to be able, in a very authentic way, collect information by going to and then speak to the victims, by establishing contact, creating an emotional and then reality context for us to collect information, but also to be able to be the voice of those people. And then I think that in that sense, what we have been able to achieve so far, I believe, I don't know if you share it, is unique. Just in the context of the authenticity of the account that we've been able to collect by interacting with the people and those who have been victims of various human rights violations and abuse. So that is, my view, is extremely important in the notion that field deployment matters, and the relationship or the contact that we've been able to have with people who have suffered is also something that is extremely important in securing that authenticity of account that we have presented in this report. So, yeah.
Thank you, Marcel. And just adding a few more clarification on the Aksum point and maybe a little bit on the Sudan one. I think I think your question was like you alluded to not getting to Aksum, but as a joint investigation team, we have not been able to get to Aksum, but that does not mean that we have not totally not been able to get to Aksum. But actually, we have been to Aksum, and this is the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, just ahead of the start of the joint investigation, was in Aksum, has conducted an in-depth investigation on the ground by talking to direct victims and families, collected lots of evidences, and we have issued quite a very detailed report which has documented and reported the killings of over 100 people in Aksum primarily by the Eritrean forces. So it is those findings which has also informed the joint investigation, and the joint investigation has made use of some solid findings that two institutions have collected in advance of the start of the joint investigation. So in that sense, we have been to Aksum. It's not like we have not been to Aksum. It's one of the major investigations that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has undertaken, actually. On your point about Sudan, Marcel has explained it very well. Unfortunately, the timeline for the release of this report and the timeline to reach to all the places we need to reach to, including the logistic and security challenges, did not match. And we have not been able to speak to as many people as we would like to. So as a result, we have not been able, obviously not been able to go to Sudan. Also in our original plan, we have also intended to go and speak with IDPs in the refugees in the Sudan refugee camps. But that does not mean that we have not spoken to a lot of IDPs who are in Ethiopia, in a lot of IDP camps in Tigray and outside of Tigray region as well. So we have complemented that by talking to as wide number of sources as possible and as wide number of victims displaced from various locations. And on the point Maleskacho raised about perception of TPLF on the independence of the Commission, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, these perceptions of bias, as Albab mentioned, is not unique to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. You will find in the report that in some of the areas where we have gone for investigation work, we have experienced perceptions of bias against the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission in some instances, and we have experienced perceptions of bias against the UN office as well. So people could have those perceptions of bias, and I think the only legitimate response to that is the credibility and integrity of the work institutions do, including our commission, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Like Albab and Charles explained, not only this investigation work, but all of our other works is guided by a very rigorous methodological care and responsibility. So I think the work we have done at the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, particularly on Tigray over the last 1 year, which consists of 14 statements and 3 major investigation reports. This is since November of last year. Is testament to the independence and integrity of the work the Commission does. And you would also recall that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission actually was the first one to report on the involvement of the Eritrean forces in the Tigray conflict, particularly with the Aksum report. So our statements and reports and several of the interviews I myself have done in the past really shows that we do our work with a great sense of care and methodological approach and responsibility, and that is a testament to the independence of the work we do, including this joint investigation. I hope we have covered the questions, and maybe we can take another round.
ተስፋለም ወልደየስ ከኢትዮጵያ ኢንሳይደር እዚህ ሪፖርታችሁ ላይ ስለ አካውንታቢሊቲ የጠቀሳችሁበት ፓርት ኮንክሉዥኑ ላይ የኢንተርናሽናል ሜካኒዝሙ ኮምፕሊመንታሪ አይደለም፣ የናሽናል ሜካኒዝሙን ሪፕሌስ ማድረግ የለበትም ትላላችሁ። ነገር ግን እዛው ታች ወርዳችሁ የናሽናል ኢንስቲትዩሽኖቹ ያደረጓቸው ኢንቨስቲጌሽኖች ያሟሉ አይደሉም፣ ኢንተርናሽናል ስታንዳርድን የጠበቁ አይደሉም ይላል። ይሄ የሚጋጫውንም ወይ? ሁለተኛው ነገር የናሽናል ኢንስቲትዩሽኖቹ ኢንተርናሽናል ስታንዳርዱን የማያሟሉ ከሆነ ምንድነው ሰጀስት የምታደርጉት? ምን እንዲደረግ ነው የምትጠብቁት? በአካውንታቢሊቲ ደረጃ የተወሰኑ ምሳሌዎችን ጠቅሳቸዋል። በሚሊታሪም በሌላም ቦታ በአቶርኒ ጀነራልም የተደረጉ ነገሮችን የጠቀሳቸዋቸው አሉ። ምን እንዲደረግ ነው በአካውንታቢሊቲ ደረጃ የምታስቡት? አመሰግናለሁ።
አመሰግናለሁ። ጥያቄ ለዶክተር ዳንኤል በአማርኛ መልስ ለማግኘት ነው። በእንግሊዝኛ በተወሰነ መልኩ የተነሳ ስለሆነ ከኢትዮጵያ ብሮድካስቲንግ ኮርፖሬሽን ደምስ ይባላለሁ። የአንደኛው ጥያቄ በትግራይ የነበረው አጠቃላይ ክራይሲስ እንዲጀመር የህወሓት ኃይሎች በሰሜን ዕዝ ላይ ጥቃት በመፈጸማቸው ያን ተከትሎ መንግስት የወሰደው ካውንተር ኦፌንሲቭ ከመንግስትና በሪፖርቱ የተጠቀሱት አካላት የወሰዱት ካውንተር ኦፌንሲቭ ነው የሚል ነው የሚጠቀሰው። በእናንተ ፋይንዲንግ ህወሓት በሰሜን ዕዝ ላይ ጥቃት ፈጽሟል የሚለውን እናንተ አይታችሁታል ወይ? ምክንያቱም ኮንቴንሽስ ነው። አንዳንድ የህወሓት ሰዎች መብረቃዊ ጥቃት ፈጽመናል ሲሉ ያነሳሉ። ሌሎች ግን አይ ይሄን በግልጽ የማያስቀምጡት ሰዎች አሉና በፋይንዲንጋችሁ ይሄ ህወሓት በግልጽ ሪፖርቱም ላይ በተወሰነ መንገድ የተነሳ ስለሆነ በግልጽ ይሄን መፈጸሙን አረጋግጣችኋል ወይ? አንደኛው ጥያቄ እሱ ነው። ሁለተኛ የሰብአዊ ጥቃት ሁሉም ፓርቲዎች እንደፈጸሙ ተነስቷል። ይሄ የዘር ማጥፋት ጥቃት ተብሎ ሊገለጽ የሚችል ነው ወይ? ሪፖርቱ ይሄን እንዴት ነው የሚያየው የሚል ነው። ሌላው ረሃብን እንደ የጦር ስልት መጠቀም ላይ ይሄን እንዴት ነው ሪፖርታችሁ ያየው የሚለውንም ይሄንም እንዲያነሱልኝ ፈልጋለሁ። ሌላው አሁን በአፋርና በአማራ ክልል ተስፋፍቶ ጦርነቱ የቀጠለ በመሆኑ ይሄን ኢንቨስቲጌት ለማድረግ ጆይንት ቲሙ ይሰራል ወይ? አመሰግናለሁ።
Okay, so the question was in Amharic, so I think I'll respond in Amharic. Accountability ላይ የጠቀስከው ተስፋለም so አጠቃላይ ፕሪንሲፕሉ ኢንተርናሽናል ክሪሚናል ፕሮሲኪዩሽን ኢንተርናሽናል ክራይምስ አማውንት የሚያደርጉ በሮም ስታቹትም የተጠቀሰው ናሽናል ሜካኒዝምስ ዊሊንግ እና ኤብል እስከሆኑ ድረስ ፕሮሲኪዩት የሚያደርጉት እነሱ ናቸው። ኢንተርናሽናል ሜካኒዝሞች ኮምፕሊመንት ነው የሚያደርጉት ወይ ዊሊንግ እና ኤብል እስካልሆኑ ድረስ ነው። ሶ I think ሙሉን ማንበብ ያስፈልጋል። ሬኮሜንዴሽን ላይም የተጻፈውም ማየት ይኖርብናል። ስቴትመንቱን ኦፕኒንግ ሪማርኩ ላይም ፕራይመሪ ኦብሊጌሽን ያለበት መንግስት እንደሆነ ይጠቅሳል። ሶ የሬኮሜንዴሽናችን ላይም እንዳስቀመጥ ነው ሁለት ኦፕሽን እንዳለ አሳይተናል። ናሽናል ሜካኒዝሞች ፕሮሲኪዩት ማድረግ ኦፍ ኮርስ ኢንተርናሽናል ስታንዳርዱን ባሟላ ሁኔታ ፕሮሲኪዩት ማድረግ እንደሚችሉ አንዳንድ ስቴፖችም እየተወሰዱ እንደሆነ ሬኮግናይዝ አድርገናል። ግን ማግኒቲዩድ እና ግራቪቲውን በማየት ካፓሲቲ አለ ወይ የሚለው አሰስ የሚደረግ ነገር ነው። ይሄንን አት ዲስ ፖይንት ኮንክሉድ የምናደርግበት አይደለም። ፈርዘር ኢንቨስቲጌሽን ያስፈልጋል። ፕሮሲኪዩሽንም የሚከተሉት ነገሮች ይኖራሉ። ግን ያው ሬኮመንድ ያደረግነውም ሰፖርት እንደሚያስፈልግ ነው። ሌሎች አገሮችም ኢንተርናሽናል ክራይሞች በሎካል ወይም በናሽናል ኮርትስ ፕሮሲኪዩት ተደርገው ያውቃሉ። ግን ኦፍ ኮርስ የስፔሻል ቤንች ሊኖር ይችላል ወይም እርዳታ ሊያስፈልገው ይችላል። ሶ ጀስት ይሄኛውን አድረስ ላድርግ። የኖርዘርን ኮማንድ አታክ የሚለውን ደግሞ የኢንቨስቲጌሽኑ ፐርፐስ ይሄ አልነበረም። የኢንቨስቲጌሽኑ ፐርፐስ was to look at human rights violations, humanitarian law violations እና refugee law violations ነው። and like በአጠቃላይ የኢንቨስቲጌሽኑ ስታንዳርድ reasonable grounds to believe በሚለው ነው including on facts ቫዮሌሽኖች ላይ ብቻ ሳይሆን ፋክቶች ላይ ነው። so reasonable grounds to believe የሚለውን አሟልቷል ብለን እናስባለን።
On that.
Do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, sure, because it was in Amharic. I think you're not doing justice to us, huh? We're getting brief of what you're saying. But I think I just suspected that that's what Albab was saying. But I was able to pick a few of the part of the question which was in English. I have mentioned it in my opening remark that the primary responsibility for accountability lie on states. So the domestic remedies are the primary source or mean for addressing accountability. But when we face a situation where domestically or at the national level there's no state is not able or willing to ensure that obligation of accountability, then the international or regional accountability mechanism could trigger, could be triggered. And then in our report, we mentioned the possibility of international independent investigative mechanism, which, of course, is an option that is there for accountability purpose should states that are in question here fail or do not show any willingness to move forward to take judicial step for criminal accountability on some of the human rights violations we have been able to document. So I think that this is, we have even in the press release mentioned the case or the reference, we made reference to Syria, we made reference to Myanmar, who could be a kind of a model to inspire such kind of accountability process should we be in the situation to resort to them. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcel. And responding to some of the additional questions from EBC, from Demis, he asked me in Amharic, so I will respond to that in Amharic as well. So Demis ያነሳቸው ጥያቄዎች በዚህ የጣምራ ምርመራ ቡድኑ በዚህ የምርመራ ሂደት ማረጋገጥ የቻለው ተፈጽሟል ብለን የምናምነው የሰብአዊ መብት ጥሰት አይነቶች በእንግሊዘኛ ቋንቋ crimes against humanity ወይም በሰብአዊነት ላይ የተፈጸመ ወንጀል ወይም በእንግሊዘኛ ቋንቋ war crime የጦር ወንጀል ሊባሉ የሚችሉት ሁለት የወንጀል አይነቶች ሊሆኑ እንደሚችሉ የሚያመላክት ማስረጃ ነው ያገኘነው እንጂ የጂኖሳይድ ወንጀል ለመፈጸሙ ወይም ለመሞከሩ የሚያመላክት ማስረጃ አላገኘንም። ስለዚህ ሪፖርቱ የሚያረጋግጠው የተገኘው ማስረጃ በጣምራ ቡዱ በጣምራ በተሰበሰበና በጣምራ በተተነተነ መረጃ መሰረት የደረስንበት ድምዳሜ የወንጀሎቹ አይነት ተጨማሪ ምርመራ ማድረጉ አስፈላጊነት እንደተጠበቀ ሆኖ crimes against humanity ወይም war crimes ሊሆን ይችላል የሚል መደምደሚያ ነው። ስለዚህ ይሄ የዘር ማጥፋት ወንጀል የሚለውን በዚህ ሪፖርት ውስጥ አላመለከትንም። ግኝታችን ያንን አያሳይም። ከዛው ጋር ያይዘህ ያነሳው ይሄ የረሃብን ወይም ምግብን እንደ ጦር መሳሪያ መጠቀም የሚል ክስም በብዛት ይቀርብ የነበረ መሆኑ ይታወቃል። አሁንም በዚህ ምርመራችን በሰብአዊ እርዳታ አቅርቦት ላይ እንቅፋቶች የነበሩና አንዳንድ እንቅፋቶቹም በወንጀል ሊያስጠይቁ የሚችሉ ተግባሮች ሊሆኑ እንደሚችሉ ቢያሳዩም እና ይህ ደግሞ ተጨማሪ ምርመራ የሚያስፈልገው መሆኑ እንደተጠበቀ ሆኖ ነገር ግን ሆነ ተብሎ ታስቦ ታቅዶ ረሃብን እንደ ጦር መሳሪያ ለመገልገል ስራ ላይ ውሏል የሚል ድምዳሜ ግን ይህ ሪፖርት ማረጋገጥ አልቻለም። የዛ አይነት ድምዳሜ የለውም። የክስተቶችን ቅደም ተከተል በሚመለከት ያነሳኸውን በሪፖርታችን ኮንቴክስት የሚል ሴክሽን አለ። እዛ ሴክሽን ውስጥ ስታነቡ ታገኘዋለ። ኮንቴክስት ማለት የግጭቱን አነሳስ እና አውድ በአጠቃላይ ምን ይመስል እንደነበረ ባጠና ነው በመረመር ነው በጋራ በሰበሰብ ነው ማረጃ መሰረት ቅደም ተከተሉን እናስቀምጣለን እና ከዛ ውስጥ አንደኛው ጥቅምት 24 ነው በኢትዮጵያ ወይም በፈረንጅ አቆጣጠር ኖቬምበር 3 ቀን የትግራይ ኃይሎች በሰሜን እዝ ላይ የፈጸሙት ጥቃት መሆኑን በሪፖርቱ ላይ በአረጋግጠን አስቀምጠናል። ከዛ ቀጥሎ ደግሞ በማግስታው ኖቬምበር 4 ቀን የኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ያወጀውን የኦፌንሲቭ የጦርነት ምንድነው የሚባለው የኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ደግሞ ከኖቬምበር 3 ጥቃት ቀጥሎ ደግሞ በወሰደው ወታደራዊ እርምጃ የተከታተሉትን ነገሮች ቅደም ተከተላቸውን በዚህ መልክ አስቀምጠናል። ስለዚህ ይሄ በሪፖርቱ ላይ በትክክል ተቀምጧል። የዚህ አይነት ቅደም ተከተል እንደነበረው ማለት ነው። የአፋርና አማራ አካባቢ ይሄ ሪፖርት ካቋረጠበት ጊዜ በኋላ ያለውን ሁኔታዎች በሚመለከት ሁለቱም ተቋሞች OHCHRም የኢትዮጵያ ሁማን ራይትስ ኮሚሽንም የየራሳችን ምርመራ ስራዎችና ክትትል ማድረግ ቀጥለናል። የሃይ ኮሚሽነር ፎር ሁማን ራይትስ ምናልባት ዛሬ የሚያወጡት አፕዴት እንዳላቸው ገልጸዋል እና ምናልባት እነሱ በዛሬው ዕለት ወይም ሰሞኑን የሚያወጡት አፕዴት ይኖራቸዋል። በሌላ በኩል ግን የኢትዮጵያ ሰብአዊ መብቶች ኮሚሽንም በራሳችን በኩል ምርመራ ስናደርግ ስለቆየን ከዛ ከጁን መጨረሻ በኋላ ያሉ ሁኔታዎችን በሚመለከት ያደረግነውን ክትትልና የደረስንባቸውን ግኝቶች ወደፊት እናሳውቃለን። ግን ይሄ ጆይንትሊ የተሰራ ሳይሆን በየራሳችን ተቋሞች የተሰራ ነው። ምናልባት ግን መረጃዎቻችንን አነጻጽረን የጋራ ስራም ልንሰራ የምንችልበት እድል ካለ በመነጋገር ላይ ነው ያለነው። So ሁላችሁንም I thank you so much all of you for coming for the press conference, and you'll find the full report in our websites like I said, and have a wonderful day and a wonderful afternoon.